Hello and welcome to Finding, Understanding, and Using Research about Assistive Technology. My name is Penny Reed, and I'm hoping that you will find some useful information from this session. It is part 2 of a 2-part series, but if you missed part 1, that will not interfere with your ability to benefit from this. I want to begin by asking you to tell me what your role is, because it helps me think about what I want to say to you. So if you're an administrator, an AT specialist, an OT or PT, a parent, a psychologist, a speech and language pathologist, or a teacher, would you please let me know? Thank you so much. Let's see what we're seeing. Who's here? Okay, lots of SLPs again, several AT specialists, some other. We always have other, don't we? And a few teachers. That's good. A few administrators. That's also wonderful. I appreciate all of you who are taking time to do this. I'll wait just a little bit more. That looks like we've got most of you. Thank you. I want to start with a question for you. Let's imagine that your special education director has a small amount of money to spend. You know, that happens once in a while. They find that they no longer need to hold aside some money for unemployment insurance or something, and then suddenly there's some money to spend. One proposal is to purchase access to talking books for all the middle and high school students with an identified disability in reading. Another is to purchase text-to-speech software for those same students. And yet another teacher wants to focus on teaching a note-taking strategy that she believes increases reading comprehension. What would you choose? I want you to take a guess at what might be the best thing. I've got a little poll for you here. There's no penalty for being wrong. It's just kind of fun to see what you think about, and I'm going to tell you what the research tells us about these three when we get to the end of the presentation. So let's see what you think. Okay. And we've got 100%. So we're pretty torn between text-to-speech software and audio text plus print text plus training. So let's see what we'll find out later. Oh, the audio text plus print text plus training is pulling ahead. Okay. Well, I want to start by just talking a little bit about learning disabilities and literacy. This session is going to focus on mostly literacy, reading and writing, and primarily with looking at students with higher incidence disabilities, although I will also refer to some of the research on kids with some more significant disabilities. About 90% of students with learning disabilities have a significant difficulty in literacy and in general. And these students are more likely than their peers to be disengaged from the learning process. So it's an area where we really want to focus some of our efforts to make sure that we can keep these students engaged and in school. One of the problems is that our traditional reading instruction is really designed to support readers' ability to decode, and that before you can make the connection between the meaning of something, you have to make the connection between sounds heard and letters read. And what happens is that this leaves behind a group of students who will probably never achieve a level of speed, fluency, and accuracy that will really support their emotional and social and cognitive and intellectual development. Hirsch in 2003 did a review and found that this traditional reading instruction leaves the struggling reader with little or no energy or capacity to solve the word, make sense of it, and then do something with it, which is what we call comprehension. And that, excuse me, by high school, many of our learning disability students, in fact about 21% or more, are at least 5 grade levels behind in reading. Now, if I was sitting there with that great big textbook knowing that I couldn't read it, I wouldn't even want to participate. That's why 25% or more of our students with learning disabilities leave school without graduating. And that's from a study by Newman in 2011. So it's relatively current, and I think it contributes significantly to our pretty dismal high school graduation rate in our country. So let's look at some assistive technology that might help with reading. Text-to-speech software is the most common assistive technology used for students who are struggling with reading. And what the research tells us, and I will go very specifically into several studies that you may want to follow up on, but what we're going to find is that it works well for some, but not all. And so our task is to try to figure out how we know which students it might work for. And also, you'll find that it has to be tried for multiple sessions to see if it will make a difference. And that the programs that are out there have varying features, including reading rate, voice type, or type of voice, the document tagging, and the dynamic highlighting. Excuse me, and some of those make a difference for some students. And so not every text-to-speech software program will be appropriate for every student. And I think it's particularly hard for some of the students who may have additional diagnosis at the same time as a learning disability. They may have attention deficit or hyperactivity or some other problem that makes it hard for them to focus and to attend. One of the, well, actually two studies that I really like by Stodden, Roberts, Takahashi, Park, and Stodden out of University of Hawaii looked at text-to-speech with high school students. And one of the nice things about their study is that they both had a large number of students for something related to special education. They had 35 high school students with learning disabilities in the first one and 34 in the second one. And what they found was that text-to-speech increased vocabulary, increased reading speed, and provided exposure to correct pronunciation for these students. But one of the significant things from these studies is that they found that it needed to be used at least 40 minutes per week for a full semester before they started to see the real impact of it. So, trying it for a couple hours here and there, or even for a month, is not going to show us whether text-to-speech is going to make a significant difference for this student. They theorized, based on their study, that using text-to-speech allows more room in active memory for then constructing meaning from that. And they found that students reported being much less fatigued when they were able to use the text-to-speech. So those are two things that we can look at in thinking about text-to-speech. A couple more studies that I thought were useful. One of the benefits of the text-to-speech software is that it allows students some choice and control over what they do. And I think the more choice and control they have to change it for themselves, you're going to have more interest, more motivation, and more engagement. So that's one of the things to think about as you use it with students. Can they change the color contrast? Can they change the background? Can they change the print size? And the more control they have, the more likely they will find that sort of sweet spot for themselves where it really works the best. Strangeman and Dalton in 2006 found that text-to-speech allowed the students they studied to customize their viewing, interacting, and pacing with the text, and that those really enhanced the student engagement and motivation. Last week I talked a little bit about the research that told us that using technology for simple things like reminders was more engaging than just having a card with that on. And I think we see the same thing. Our students are very engaged by technology, and so having that opportunity to make the changes that the technology is capable of can be really helpful. Meyer and Bauk did an interesting study in 2014, and they found that students often feel they finish reading tasks more quickly and read more fluently with text-to-speech even when they don't. And why would that be? I think some of it is that fact that they had more active memory to use for other tasks, so they felt better, they weren't as fatigued, they were more engaged. So it's interesting. We know how we feel about something really affects how much we're willing to use it and in what situations we will use it. So that's a significant finding, that even if they don't read more quickly, if they feel they read more quickly, it can make a difference. an interesting study by Parr in 2013 where she worked with 28 fifth-grade students, and she really analyzed what the text-to-speech technology meant to these students. And what she talked a lot in this article about what she tells parents and educators when they say things, but how will they ever learn to read if they use the computer to say it? And she identifies the things that the student still has to do. So even though they're using the computer with text-to-speech to read the text, it means that the computer has become their decoding eyes. But the student still has to add the expression that gives it meaning. They have to read and reread with fluency until they understand something. They have to create that picture in their mind of what happened, and they make the connections and make sense of it all. And she contends that that is the heart of what we're trying to get them to do, both in reading for fun and reading for meaning in our science and social studies textbook. Using text-to-speech really frees the listener to focus on the meaning of the text, and that then can stay with them and be useful to them. She pointed out that students react differently to it, and not every student will benefit from it, and she thinks it's important to be able to talk with students individually about what they find useful and what they don't. She said that text-to-speech works best for those students who have real problems with decoding and fluency, and remind us that it still allows them to do the real work of reading, which is comprehension. If you'd like a good overall article about the use of text-to-speech with some great ideas about interacting with your fellow teachers, about why it might work and why it might not work and what's valuable about it, I highly recommend this article by Parr. She points out that it's really a good way to allow them then to focus on things like the structure of the text and the author's intent and the author's style. And those are things that students who are spending all their energy on decoding never get to think about. So Parr really found it useful with these fifth-grade students, and I thought her article was very useful. Wood, Moxley, Tigg, and Wagner from Florida State University did a really wonderful definitive meta-analysis of the review, meta-analysis of the research on text-to-speech. They excluded students and studies without identified learning disabilities, which means they've really honed in on our target audience for us. And remember, what we're expected to do is to find studies that relate to the students whom we are teaching. It did include single subject design studies, which again is new, and I talked about that last week. It's an important addition to our research body. They found in their review that the use of text-to-speech tools has a significant positive impact on reading comprehension scores for students with identified learning disabilities. I would say this is one of those seminal definitive reviews that I think you'll find yourself citing for a number of years. They've done a good service for us. Last week I used the phrase several times that something was asked and answered, and one of you asked me in a question afterwards, is that what I should say when someone asks me about it? I think probably the term is definitive. And last week, again, I talked about the research on whether using augmented communication would interfere with the development of speech. And it's very, very clear. There's a definitive review by Miller, Light, and Schlosser that I cited last week, and that is in your references that you will get from this week also, that made it so clear that something will not be researched much in the future because we know the answer. I don't think we're quite there yet with this, but I think this has the possibility to begin to put us in that point with text-to-speech, that we will be able to say that yes, for many kids with learning disabilities in reading, it makes a significant difference. They also, Wood and colleagues, pointed out these things for us, that text-to-speech is best for students with slow or inaccurate decoding that does not correlate to their cognitive and intellectual potential. So these are students who are reading with less than 90% accuracy. It's really good for students with lower levels of fluency, typically students that read between 24 to 92 words per minute. So if you've got a student who's struggling but is reading at more than 92 words per minute, they may not find text-to-speech useful or helpful. It's good for students with high levels of listening comprehension that can be activated and brought into use by the text-to-speech. It's good for students with low levels of confidence and a lack of an internal motivation that lead the reader to withdrawing and not wanting to participate. It's good for students with pacing and attentional difficulties. So kids that are distracted, when you combine the auditory output with that cursor moving from word to word, may help them stay more engaged, and at least will help them, if they have wandered, to come back to the place in the text where the word is being read. And it's helpful for the student who needs multiple readings of assigned text. So when you are looking at your students and trying to decide, well, who might benefit from text-to-speech, these are some key things you can look at in determining whether you want to give it a try with a student. One of the things we know that it is kind of common sense, but it's also good to have some research that supports it. Edmonson and colleagues in 2009 found that we really need to provide training and comprehension to these students, especially when we're talking about secondary students who have struggled for years with reading. They have been so engaged in decoding that they haven't had time to even listen to, think about, or practice the comprehension training that they may have gotten. So they will need to have that taught again and modeled for them. They need to learn how to think aloud, how to self-question and reflect during and after the reading, because chances are they've not even had a chance to engage in any of those activities. So engaging the students to become more actively involved in monitoring their understanding and in processing text meaning is an important skill that we're going to have to focus on. They've rarely gotten to do that in the past. Sort of a summary of the results. Studies have shown varying levels of impact by text-to-speech. The research is a little bit limited. I said that review by Wood and colleagues is a nice step for us. I think we'll still see a little bit more. And I hope what we'll find is some research that will help us even more clearly define who the text-to-speech might work for. But we're going to see research supports the use of text-to-speech. It's pretty clear. And probably its biggest impact is to increase fluency and free up the cognitive processing to work on comprehension. The research tells us that it's most effective if we pair it with comprehension strategy training, and to make sure we invest enough time to see results. PAR recommends talking with students about how it's working or not working for her or him. We may find that there are some simple changes that the text-to-speech software allows us to do, such as changing contrast or size of print, or changing the speed with which it's reading, that can make it work better for an individual student. I want to switch now to look just shortly at graphic organizers for reading. I didn't find a lot of research on this, but I found a couple of studies I wanted to mention. Hall and Strangeman in 2002, and Garia, Jatandra, Sud, and Sachs in 2007 found that it can help students to take notes, to comprehend content, and to make connections within and between topics. It may lead to better participation in class because they can connect the information better. It helps them visualize the relationship between different facts that they learned, and helps them by writing it into a graphic organizer. It helps them later visually to find that information, to retrieve it for studying or for participating in class or for performance on tests. I did not find a specific study that looked at the difference between written and technology-based graphic organizers, but I would like to generalize from what we talked about last week in general with technology-based tools seem to be more appealing and more engaging for our students, and I would make that claim also for technology-based graphic organizers such as Inspiration, Kidspiration, Free Mind. There's a variety of them. But we can see that it allows us as educators to change the visual representation of the images and the text and to convert easily from an outline to a concept map or back and forth, and to add audio and text. So certainly it's a tool that makes it easier for us to enhance it and to make it more usable, but it also allows the student to manipulate the text, to move it around, to alternate between the concept map and the outlining. I have a typo there. And to insert and reuse and make notes. And so I think graphic organizers, again, are a plus. There wasn't a lot of research, but I think it's worth a try for some students. I looked for research just on ebooks in general. We certainly see a lot of those. I didn't find much research on it, but this study by Siegenthaler, Wirtz, and Groner in 2011 looked at eye tracking data and found that with ebooks, the students showed a significant decreased fixation on specific places in the text when compared to paper books. And so it represented an increase in fluency and speed for those readers. And this opportunity to change font size and again to change background or contrast probably is the difference in it. It may lead to increased legibility for some students. So if that's all you have access to, it's still worth a try for some students to see if it would make a difference. I'm sorry I didn't find any more than that. Again, looking just at tablet computers, which is just kind of, well, what framework are they in? Rader, Anderson, and Kieran looked at that and found that the use of iPad 2 with specific applications could result in academic gains in reading comprehension, reading fluency, and vocabulary in students with learning disabilities. And I think we would have to apply the research from the specific types of applications in order to know what impact they had. But again, if this is a tool you have access to, you can find that it might make a difference for some of your students with learning disabilities. I want to step back for just a minute and away from looking just at learning disabilities and look at the research and reading about the use of assistive technology for students with intellectual disabilities or more significant disabilities. There's a wonderful article, a wonderful review by Erickson, Hanser, Hatch, and Sanders from 2009. And they looked at the research regarding reading and found that research about reading for students with significant disabilities tended to focus on really isolated things like sight word memorization, drill and practice, and decontextualized sub-skills like letter recognition, letter name, letter sound, as opposed to reading, and that the emergent literacy is just not well researched in this area. But they did say that some studies like that by Teal and Susby told us that emergent literacy research shows us that oral and written language, the skills of listening and speaking and reading and writing, develop concurrently and interrelatedly rather than sequentially, so that we've got to have these working together. And Erickson and colleagues recommend Meville to Weeville from AbleNet, which they identify as one of the few research-based programs for students in this beginning literacy area. And this pointed out that it used some AT like Bookworm and QuickTalker within its program, and that you can also use other AT as well. But I think the important thing here is that we don't have enough research in this area, and I hope this is something we'll see more of. But the most important thing I got out of this is that when children are in an emergent literacy stage, they really need lots of activities around reading and writing and listening and speaking. For example, they gave the example when children write, even when it's a scribble that we see nothing in yet, they attempt to read that to us. And if as an adult we ask a student what he or she wrote, they'll tell us something. And that those speaking and listening and interpretation activities are a critical part of literacy development. We don't want to take them away. And I want to go on. This is one of the things they talked about with quite a bit of emphasis, and that is the use of picture-supported text. I put this in because this is really related to assistive technology. The use of picture-supported text really came with our use of assistive technology for students at a beginning literacy stage. And what they found was that non-conventional forms of literacy, such as picture-supported text, actually limit literacy learning in the long run and interfere with learning opportunities. What they said was that picture-supported text provides access to immediate content, but actually impedes the learning of reading skills. Hatch, in her work in 2009, gave a good example of this. She pointed out that one problem is that the picture being used actually can be confusing, and she used an example of words like do and is. There's no obvious picture referent for the word do or the word is. So we have to use an abstract, arbitrary symbol, and no matter what picture-supported program you're using, they will have developed an abstract, arbitrary symbol. We have to teach the student that. The student has to take time and effort and focus to learn that. And once they do, they can only learn it they can only use it within the use of picture-supported text. It will not generalize to later reading. And what Hatch says is, why not teach the word do and is? If it's just a series of lines anyway, we might as well teach them the actual word, which then later could lead to reading, rather than teaching a symbol. So this I think, is one of the important things that comes out of here. And I don't know if I said this, but this report by Erickson, Hanser, Hatch, and Sanders is a free download that you can get. And in your bibliography that you'll get at the end of this, you will find that in there. I highly recommend it if you're not familiar with it. It's a very useful review of the research and includes their own research, which is significant. In terms of AT for writing, still focusing on students with significant disabilities, there's very little research. I looked at research by Sturm, Callie, Nelson, and Staskowski, and they're the developers of the Developmental Writing Scale, which has been a wonderful tool for us in measuring students' progress as they learn to write. And they just were saying that, there's just not much there, but whatever tools you might use, whether you're using alternate keyboards, some switch access, some partner-assisted scanning, for kids with a little more advanced using word prediction or speech-to-text, all of those have to be paired with authentic writing instruction and interaction. And the writing level of students with significant disabilities is a critical piece where we haven't done much of that. We need more work for sure in this area and more research about what might work, but we do know that a lot of our students with disabilities have not had much experience with writing and do not have the writing skills that they should have at this level. One of the studies that I found recently that I think is really important, it fits well with this, and I think it throws a light on a little bit, is by Aladdin Seneschal, and they published in Developmental Psychology earlier this year. And they found a relationship between the sophistication of invented spelling and later reading, and said that alphabetical knowledge and phonological awareness are developed through practice, which we know, But again, if we take away the scribbling, the writing, the pretend spelling, that alphabetical knowledge, then we take away their ability to learn to write and spell. They strongly discourage the use of picture-supported writing as a substitute for that ability to misspell those words and then figure out what they mean, because that alphabetical knowledge and phonological awareness just will not develop. So it's another one of those findings that I think is hard for us. I think that we all have thought that the use of the symbols is a nice stepping stone for students, and that they will in fact then move on to not needing it. They're going to sort of throw away that crutch and walk on their own. But when they put their effort into learning the symbols, it does not translate well into decoding and or producing written material. Writing in general, going back to students with learning disabilities, Mays, Calhoun, and Crowell looked at students across the country and found that 65% of students referred for learning disabilities have a writing disability. And that's more than twice as many that have disabilities in reading, math, and spelling. So writing is the biggie here. The National Assessment of Educational Progress in 2009 found that only 6% of students with disabilities scored at a proficient level on writing tests. 6%. That's not even 1/10 of our students out there. And basically 46% score below basic level and 48% perform just at basic level. You know, and that's not enough. It's an area where we really need to focus and work hard. Students with learning disabilities are more likely to have errors in spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and word usage. And their writing is more likely to be shorter and illegible. Students with learning disabilities often distinguish themselves by a noticeable gap between their oral and written expressive abilities. That same student who leads the class in a discussion writes a few short, choppy sentences when it comes time to writing. And so I think the use of technology to help them move forward in writing is a critical place. So let's look at that. Some reviews have found that personal computers, spelling checkers, digitized text, word prediction software, speech or voice recognition, and alternative writing are the most common computer features used in schools to facilitate writing. I think we probably knew that, but I chose to focus on word prediction as another start here. And I found several useful studies. Word prediction alone and in combination with text-to-speech in general in all these studies had a positive impact on the written output of students with identified learning disabilities. But there are some differences in the studies. Cilio and Barbetta, for instance, found that students using word prediction and word prediction with text-to-speech wrote better organized, longer, more syntactically mature compositions with fewer spelling errors, while text-to-speech alone had little or no impact in their study in 2010. At the same time, Cullen, Richards, Lawless Frank found that students using text-to-speech alone and with word prediction did better. They found they wrote more words correctly, and received higher holistic rubric scores. So what's the difference? Again, I think this is an area where we need more work to find out when text-to-speech alone is enough and when we need word prediction with it. I think that we'll see more studies in this area, but I would look at, rather than always doing word prediction alone or always doing word prediction with text-to-speech or always doing text-to-speech alone, look at the possibility of interviewing your students and finding out what about this software works for them and what doesn't, so that we can make a more skilled assignment of what that student might use, or giving them the flexibility to choose what works for them. I also looked at the use of graphic organizers for writing. We looked at reading a few minutes ago, but in writing, there's a number of studies, and I listed them below, that show increases in the number of words written, the amount of time spent on planning, and the common story elements. The changes in overall organization were found in some, but not all of these studies. A significant factor in these studies was that increases were not immediate upon the provision of the graphic organizer support. It took a while for students to learn to use them and to make meaning from it so that it impacted their own writing. And again, it was clear in these studies that it has to be paired with good instruction. The provision of graphic organizers alone will not make much difference. I want to move on to voice recognition. And it's more commonly called speech recognition now, but in the earlier research it was all voice recognition, so I sort of stuck with that throughout this next section. The use of voice recognition produced passages with more words and fewer errors than handwritten passages in research by Quinlan, McArthur and Cavalier, and McCollum, Nation, and Gunn. And that stretched across from 10 years ago to right now. There were also a number of studies a little earlier than that, but when you go much before 2004, the voice recognition software wasn't as good and wasn't as available. So I think, and this is a case where we want to look at the more current research. There were surprisingly few studies that I found, and I was disappointed in that. And also there were small numbers of participants. So again, I think this is an area where we'll see more research, because speech recognition is now so available on our cell phones and our tablets and all of our apps. So I think that we'll see a lot more of this. One thing that Collins, Richards, and Lawless Frank found was that it clearly requires the ability to plan their phrases and sentences and to continue to dictate without stopping to correct every error. In their research, the kids that really just stopped every time it didn't get what they wanted to say really didn't do well with it, and it didn't find it as a tool that really improved their writing. But the work by McCollum, Nation, and Gunn was exciting. It's current, and it was really interesting to me. They looked at punctuation, capitalization, spelling, and syntactical and semantic usage. And to get the score on semantical and semantic usage, they looked at total words, total multisyllabic words, and correct writing sequences. And that meant looking at every pair of words in the written product of the student and seeing if it was a correct sequence. It was really a very exciting study, and they found very significant changes from pre-test to post-test. So the use of voice recognition in their study was very significant for these students. And again, this would be the equivalent of a single subject design across 3 students, rather than, it's certainly not a group design. There was nobody assigned to a control group or anything. We have just pre and post kinds of information, but it's pretty darn significant and something we really need to look at. So when to use voice recognition or speech recognition? In just looking at these few studies we found, it seems to work for many, but not all students with learning disability. Lee and Hamill found that it's particularly beneficial for those whose oral skills are stronger than their writing skills. I guess that makes sense. I think we're going to look for more research in this area, but I wanted to share what was out there because I do think it's a very promising practice for us. If you want to try it, a wonderful guide is Speech Recognition as AT for Writing. It's by Cochran and Key, 2014. It's a free download, and I've given you the website here so that you can get that. Batarowitz, Misiuna, and Pollock from the McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario did a wonderful review of studies in 2012 about the impact of assistive technology or technology on writing. It was a very thorough review of the research. It was presented in very usable format. Again, if you'd like a good overview of the research of assistive technology on writing, this is what I would recommend. They looked at word processing software, spell checkers, word prediction, speech recognition, concept mapping and organizing software, and multimedia. And what they found is the studies are limited, but suggest positive influence on the quality of written text, organization, transcription, and revising. They also found some interesting things. Certainly that technology needs to combine with instruction to yield positive results, but that collaborating with peers when using technology appears beneficial for both composing and revising, and they had that across some studies. So that was an interesting factor they pulled out of their research. And that technology motivates children and enhances their opportunities to practice writing. So they're more willing to give it a try. That thing that's been so awful for them, that they don't like the results of, they're willing to try again when technology is involved. So that motivational factor is one we have to remember in working with our students. So earlier, I asked you what you thought about using audio text alone, using text-to-speech software, or using audio text and print text and training and note-taking. I asked you what you would choose. So let's look at some research that will tell us maybe what we should have chosen. Boyle, Rosenberg, Connolly, Washburn, Brickerhofer, and Banerjee in 2003 found that audio combined with text could be significant. And looking back a little further, we have some studies like this one from 1996 that said listening to text while following along with a printed word resulted in improved comprehension and vocabulary skills. So let's keep that in mind. We know that listening alone without visual text is not effective. So yes, you were right to not vote at all for audio alone. I have a sophisticated audience here. But I want to remind you that if we had audio text with just a printed text and some note-taking instructions, it's really hard to guarantee that that student is following along with the printed word. That the one thing in there that all the research would support is the text-to-speech. And the reason I say that is the text-to-speech software follows automatically as the word is spoken. We then see the word highlighted. So those students with attention deficit who lose track are automatically going to come back to it. I think that in a very small group where we had a lot of interaction with adults, we could probably say that using an audio book and printed text and having them follow along might be effective. But I think our money is best spent with text-to-speech because we guarantee that connection is made. So my vote was the text-to-speech because it will highlight the word being read. And so that's food for thought for you. Overall, there's a study I love by Watson, Ito, Smith, and Anderson because they looked at our process. And they looked at specifically progress on IEP goals. They had a group of students who were struggling to make progress in their IEPs. They found that these were kids that were having the same goals repeated in multi-years. And they added assistive technology as an intervention to this group of students. And they found that they made more progress than they'd been making. They were making progress in meeting IEP goals. And in analyzing that progress, they found that assistive technology's contribution was greater than any of the other 9 other intervention strategies that were being used with these kids. So this is a favorite for me. It looks in general at the impact of assistive technology, and I think it's significant for us to know about. I think we'll see more research like this. They also found that the team approach is most effective, and I'm sorry I don't remember exactly how they pulled that out of their research, but it was an interesting study. So I've talked both last week and this week about all these studies. So where do you find them? And I also want to speak to those of you who think you can't read research because you don't like statistics. I want to say, first of all, the best place for you to find research articles is in peer-reviewed professional journals. They really give you a well-researched study to begin with. And by reading through a few articles, like a lot of the ones that I've cited for you, which are reviews of hundreds of studies, you can compare to find what the best evidence is. And your job is to evaluate the applicability of this research to your own situation. Dave Edinburgh did a nice article in 2005 about how to read a special education technology research article and pointed out to us the things that you might need to ask, like did they use the right methods? Were the subjects randomly assigned? Were the groups equivalent? Did they use the right measurement tools? But I will say to you, you don't need to do all that. If it made it into a peer-reviewed journal, those questions have been asked and answered. So how do you know if it's a peer-reviewed journal? Well, if you subscribe to some journal through one of your professional organizations or just have paid to get some kind of a professional journal, if there are reviewers, they'll be listed in the front of every journal. So let me show you the names of a few. Here's some really good ones. In the area of augmentative and alternative communication, the Isaac Journal. From RESNA, the journal entitled Assistive Technology. From ISTE, the Journal of Research on Technology and Education. If you're in special ed, you're a member of the Council for Exceptional Children and the Technology and Media Division, you get the Journal of Special Ed Technology. If you're a speech and language pathologist and a member of ASHA, you can get the Journal of Speech, Language, and Hearing Research. Whatever your professional organization, you're going to find research there. Several of the articles I cited were from AJOP, the American Journal of Occupational Therapy, so that's another important one. I personally subscribe to the Journal of Special Ed Technology, and it has a large percentage of research about assistive technology for students with disabilities. If you look at the ISTE one, the Journal of Research on Technology and Education, that's going to be more general technology with a few things that apply to assistive technology. If you choose to get the RESNA one, if you're a member of RESNA and want to pay for assistive technology, it's much broader and you'll see more about mobility devices and things than about academic things. But all of these give you access to good research. They're all peer-reviewed journals, and you can trust that the articles cited in there do meet those standards of solid research. I really strongly recommend that you get one of them and that you work together with your team from school to share some of the articles. None of us have time to read tons of journals. Well, except me. I have time because I'm retired. But you, when you're working, don't have time to read a lot of journals, but you could manage one and review it once a week. Take a look. Read one article. Skim through it. See if you think it's going to be useful. If it is, then take time to read it. But don't hold back because you think you don't know statistics or that you can't read research. You can. And you can go and read the results and see what they found without necessarily needing to understand if they used exactly the right math. Some other things that I want to share is that a recent find for me was this new website about AT research, and this was started by Heidi Kester, and she wrote, "We have developed a new free resource called AT Node, available for you to try at kpronline.com/ATNode. It's a public searchable collection of research on the use of computer access interfaces by people with disabilities. It includes text entry rate data from studies published since 1986. So Heidi Kester and her colleague Sajay Arthanath have done all this research, and they're now making it available to you. They intend in the future to add other topics. I know this is a little hard to read, and I apologize for that. It was screenshot was the best I could do, but I wanted to draw your attention to it. I don't know personally how much useful information I'm going to get from this yet. It's brand new to me. I just found it a week or two ago. But I wanted to share with you because I think, again, this is where we're going in the future, is to have more websites with more information for us about it, and I hope that you'll find that useful. I've saved about 10 minutes here at the end, again this week, to try to answer your questions, and I would love to hear from you now in the chat questions of what else do you want to know and how can I help? I know there are 38 of you out there. Somebody must have a question. Is there research, Nancy Shepherdson, is there research that supports a human voice versus a computer-generated voice? You know, I didn't find anything definitive on that, and I did look a little bit. What I think is that it's very individual, and that what you're going to have to do is talk to your student about it. Give them a chance with each, if you can, and see what difference it makes. That was a good question, Nancy. Thank you. Anyone else? Vince Ivory, I work with adults with intellectual disabilities. Where can I find information most focused on this population? Well, I think the Journal of Special Ed Technologies that I mentioned would be one of them. Certainly the research that Karen Erickson was talking about with early literacy development applies. But some of the things I talked about last week, I don't know, Vince, if you're a part of that, focused on some research with adults with intellectual disabilities. What I usually do is look for what journals are they publishing in, and then I start tracking back through other issues in that same journal, because usually if they have an interest, you'll find it starting to appear. So I hope that's helpful to you. If you have a university library, well, you said you may work with, oh no, that was another one that works at the university. If you can get to a university library where they have a number of journals, either there physically or that you can access digitally, I think starting to review them. Find one research article that really meets your needs and then track back to what they cited and what kind of journals that came from. Anne Bowie, are there research and data on students with multiple learning needs, dyslexia, and intellectual disabilities? You know, I couldn't tell that from anything that I read, Anne. I don't think that any of the tools we talked about are going to have a significantly different outcome. It would depend on how severe the intellectual disability is. But I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer to that. Rebecca Cagle, thanks, Penny, for your great info. Working in a university, I know there are lots of opportunities to gather data, but making it useful, published, and who would write it with the data is the challenge. I think there is a lot of AT data we could be getting which would really benefit us all. Oh, I think you're so right, Rebecca. I wish we could gather that. And what type of AT would be most effective for students with both cognitive and learning disabilities? Well, text-to-speech is certainly one I would try because it's going to allow them to bypass the decoding, you're going to have to do some trial and error in this area, I would think. Word prediction may or may not be helpful depending on their reading level. What I would avoid is anything with the picture-supported text because I think it's going to be harder for them to move forward. Albert Krinsky, do you feel that programs such as News to You, which has text and symbol and reading programs, are beneficial for students with cognitive problems? Again, I think it depends on how you use it and whether they're seeing only those symbols or they're seeing the words. That I know that things like that provide immediate access to the content, but the research is telling us it does not help the student progress long-term in reading. So you would have to make that decision for an individual student. Can you get it in both versions with the symbols and with text alone? And is there a way? I guess I would tend to look at materials that give us simpler wording and work on the actual reading rather than the symbols. Okay, if it's available in both, you can do a little research yourself, Albert, to see how it works best for individual students. Rebecca Cagle, I'd like to see data on students that did not get AT in secondary, but they were approved for it for post-secondary, especially students with LD in reading. Rebecca, that would be interesting, and I didn't find anything like that, but I wasn't specifically looking for it. But I think nationally you've got a wonderful network of people who work with students with disabilities in college. I hope that you find some information like that. Christina Sohn, do you have research on AT devices for children with autism? I did not specifically look at just autism. I didn't rule it out, but I didn't look at that. And what about on apps that are being used? I didn't look at specific apps. I tried not to do that at all for specific software or apps because, first of all, that's not my knowledge area. But secondly, I think it's more important to look at the features and whether they work rather than the app itself. But no, I don't know the answer to that. Gosh, you're finding all these other things I should study. Thank you. We still have 3 minutes. These have been wonderful questions. Keep it up. And Albert, I want you to read that research by Karen Erickson and her colleagues. It's free and download it. It will impact what you do with your students. Will you send us, Nancy Shepardson wants to know if I will send you my slides. I probably won't do that individually, Nancy, but I have a website called the National Assistive Technology and Education, NATE Network, and within the next, 6 months at least, and maybe sooner, I want to get these slides up there. I'm trying to decide exactly how I want to do it, but I want to get this available out to all of you, and I'm in a free form, so that's what I'm thinking of right now. But I will make them available. And Deb says, a PDF of the slides are sent out in the post-webinar mail. Thanks, Deb, you're right. So they will get to see that. But in terms of my slides with all my notes, I want to get those up in a way that you can all access them. Okay, we have just a minute left. I think it's about time to say goodbye if you have one more question. Rebecca Cagle, the Quiet for Post-Secondary may be a good starting place for getting data in college. Absolutely. It's free and can be self-administered. It can be a good starting place for students to see where their skills are in AT in a college setting. Yes, that's QIAT-PS, Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology and Post-Secondary. If you Google that, you will get to that website. And Ann Buey says, thanks so much. And Ann, you are welcome. Thank you, everybody, for staying through this. I appreciate it. Our time is up. Goodbye.